Ooh, I'm excited about this one. So today we're talking about finding love, finding your person. And if you like my Gene Keys content, I think you're going to love this one. If you don't know what the Gene Keys are, I bet you are going to get a ton of value from this. So stick with me. So love is born from purpose. And what I mean by that is you are on this planet, your soul chose to be here so that you could achieve something. And there is another person in this world that is meant to achieve that thing with you. And I know, oh man, people start thinking about purpose and get instantly worried. I don't know what I'm meant to do for the world. I don't know how to do it. Why the hell are we all here in the first place? And the good news that I have for you is that purpose has nothing to do with what you do. And it has everything to do with who you are and how you act in the world. Purpose is who you're here to be. And when your purpose is anchored and stable, a light starts to shine through you. And so your purpose is really just a feeling of being at home on this planet and not being worried all the time and not being pessimistic all the time. And it doesn't necessarily mean a blind optimism either. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that you know in your core that life is looking out for you. And that's what's called core stability. And in the Gene Keys system, if we go backwards, so coming out of your purpose, not going into our Venus sequence, which we're about to talk about, but going back towards what's called your radiance, that line that connects those two spheres is called your core stability. And that's exactly what it means. It means being grounded in your purpose, being stable. And we're all human. We're going to have swings, and that's okay. But the more you can be in your purpose, the better your core stability and the more your radiance, which is the next sphere on the other side of that pathway, is going to shine through. And your radiance is the light you bring into the world. It's irresistible. And it's what's going to draw in a partner, or part of what's going to draw in a partner. So when you are living your purpose, your attractor field begins to call in what you actually want. Coming out of your sphere of purpose, which remember is where all of this starts in the Venus sequence, we've got our next sphere up is called the sphere of attraction. And it dictates what you're calling into your life via dharma and karma. So your dharma, if you're not familiar with that word, your soul, you are here to learn something on this planet. That is your dharma. It's just the path that your life is designed to take so that you can learn a specific thing. And your attractor field calls in people, places, and things that give you an opportunity to align with that dharma. However, your attractor field is going to call in all sorts of mayhem if your frequency isn't where it needs to be, because that mayhem and your response to it is what raises your frequency when you handle it in a way that is true to your core self. And so karma is what you're calling in and how you're responding to it. That's all karma is. The 60th gene key is my purpose. And that at the city level is justice. And in order to understand dharma and karma, you have to understand universal justice, which isn't at all like what we think of justice as. It's what we were striving to recreate, but like any system in the physical world, it is limited, which is the shadow of the 60th gene key. And so we perverted the idea of justice. We've turned it into, and I was wronged, and so now you need to be wronged. But in reality, justice is just divine balance. And so that is why karma works as it works. Because anything that goes out into the universe has to come back into you. And the way that you respond to your karma, the way that you respond to those people, places, and events dictates your level of frequency. And when your frequency is resonant with your partner's frequency, then and only then will you guys align and come together. But you have to be tuned appropriately. So coming up out of the sphere of attraction, we get to our what are called IQ and EQ. And I headlined this on my screen here, getting your shit together, because that's really what it's all about. And we all have shit. And the sooner that you can own that, the better off you're gonna be. And that shit probably goes way deeper than you think it goes. And when you start in a system like the Gene Keys, or really anytime you're just looking at your life, we need to peel back the layers like an onion. We built a way of seeing the world based on our experiences growing up in childhood, as a baby, as a teenager, even as a young adult. And whether those stories or that way of seeing the world is correct or not, they are what kept us alive. And so a lot of times we keep those stories around well past their expiration date. So when you get into your IQ and your EQ, you have a choice. You can continue to hold up your defense patterns. You can continue to default to old stories, or you can choose to lower your defenses and try a new way. And that is the pathway that connects IQ and EQ, these two spheres from the Venus sequence. It's called the pathway of defense when you're in the shadow frequencies. However, when we've done enough of our work, we raise the frequency of that pathway and it changes to the pathway of intelligence. We learn how to balance these spheres of IQ and EQ. So I'll ask you a couple of questions. Where has it gotten you? Your default responses. Who has that brought into you? And do you feel great after you use these things, after you snap into these patterns, or do you feel like crap? So why do we keep doing them? The other option is to choose love and to learn to balance your endocrine system and walk that pathway of intelligence. And I say your endocrine system because this is a hormonal response. The way that you feel in your body is from chemicals. Don't get it twisted. We talk about the emotional plane and all of this sort of woo-woo stuff. But in reality, those frequency fields are turning into real chemistry inside of your body. So balancing your IQ and your EQ, we typically will go too far one way or the other. And typically, people with a more masculine energy are going to rely more on their IQ, and people with a more feminine energy will rely more on their EQ. And I don't mean male and female, I mean masculine and feminine. So what does that mean? Well, your IQ is going to be all in your brain. It's going to be sharp, and often it's going to come across as cold. Your EQ is going to be all in your heart, all emotion. And sometimes that emotion can overtake, or a lot of times you can't express what you're feeling because the IQ isn't present. And so we're just this mush of energy without any way to get it across to the other person. So let's talk about how the IQ and the EQ develop. So your IQ and your EQ are laid down in 7-year cycles as you develop. And there's also what's called your SQ, which we're going to talk more about later. But let's start with that first cycle, which is developed from 14 to 21. And this is your IQ, which is just a way, in this sense, is a way of protecting yourself mentally when you start to feel overwhelmed. That is what your IQ does. It's this mental pattern that clicks on when things have gone sideways and you feel like you have lost control. And usually this is like a whole way of seeing the world. So we're blind to it. It's like glasses that come in front of us and we just can't see the glasses that are there. For example, mine is in this sphere, seriousness, delight, and ecstasy. So what that means to me is that I see the world, I'm serious, I need to be an adult. I've got to be tight and I've got to work a ton and the world is gonna come crashing down on me if I don't do those things. That's my tightening when I feel overwhelmed. I'm gonna take control and fight and hold on because this world is too intense. And there's probably very specific things that you think when you flip into this defense pattern. For example, for me, it's I'm the worst, or nobody cares about me. Those are thoughts that I've caught coming up over and over again in my life. So keep your eyes peeled for those things. This is going to show up very often in relationships because oftentimes we're in our head, especially if it's not an intimate relationship or a very close relationship. We're operating from that mental plane. So a lot of times this mental shadow response is what happens if we're not paying attention. We've got to start catching it in process, and we've got to own our shit when it happens. Notice those recurring thoughts. Notice the recurring pattern. Go to your Gene Keys profile and take a look at the shadow, the gift, and the city, at what's there in that sphere of IQ, and see if those words feel true for you. I promise they will. And so the question that I have when you catch yourself in this pattern, because you will eventually, is do you want to be right or do you want to find love? And that's ultimately the question. You have a choice. Do you need the other person to see it your way? Do you need them to hear you? Do you need everything to go as you want it to go? Or can you let it go? And the sphere of IQ is tough because when you get good at it, the other person doesn't even know that you just saved them from absolute mayhem because you catch the pattern in your head. And instead of spewing something out, we keep it inside and we realize, I'm not that. Okay, so now moving on to the sphere of EQ, which is laid down from when you're 7 years old to when you're 14 years old. So we went 14 to 21 and now 7 to 14. And this is a pattern that comes up when you feel emotionally unsafe. So maybe you were in your home when you were a kid and your parents started fighting, or somebody made fun of you and you just get a rush of emotion and you feel overwhelmed and you throw up this defense pattern to protect your heart. And until we can open our hearts, we return emotion with like emotion. So if somebody's mad at me, I'm gonna get mad back at them. Once we open our hearts, we're able to return any emotion that comes at us with love. And that is a big ask. And by no way am I saying that I am there, but that is what's possible. Now, there are probably very specific things that you do when you get into this emotional defense pattern. Remember, I said that there are probably very specific things that you think with your IQ, your mental defense pattern. Well, with your EQ, it's specific things probably that you do. So for example, you might lock yourself away in your room. Or another one that people might not think about is go and work out. I gotta get this out of me. And although that could be could be seen as a positive way of dealing with it, in reality, are you actually dealing with it, or are you just sweeping it under the rug and getting this energy out in a different way, which ultimately is going to come circling back around the next time that this comes up? So your EQ goes back further along and is a layer deeper than your IQ. And so when it gets triggered, a lot of times this is what leads to those blowout fights, because we are in that emotional state and we lose control sometimes, or I lose control sometimes. However, your awareness will continue to grow. And when it grows enough, you can catch yourself in that emotional reaction pattern in the moment. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it's harder to do than your IQ, because you are, that endocrinology, those hormones you're in it. And it takes some time. So be gentle with yourself when you see what's happening. Don't be mad if you see it again and again. It's gonna take some time here. And when you do notice it, don't be afraid to ask your partner for space. However, when you do ask that person for space, make sure that they know that you're not running away. You're not locking yourself in your room. You just need to take a second, and I promise I'm going to come back so that we can deal with this. It's important to me, as an example. Lastly, remember your emotions are your emotions. Projecting blame isn't ownership, ever, as hard as that is to hear at times. We can be wronged. We can certainly feel wronged. However, ultimately, you've got to choose if that being wronged is worth interrupting your peace, if it's worth putting more negativity out into the world. So when your IQ and your EQ are operating at a high frequency, you stay centered in your purpose. Your attractor field stays clear, and your frequency calls in the resonant frequency of the person that you've been waiting for. Then we get to the real gem, the SQ, which is living with an open heart. The SQ is your spiritual intelligence. And as we align our IQ and our EQ, we begin to walk up out of EQ into this sphere of SQ, and that is what's called the pathway of love. And that spiritual intelligence is laid down in our first 7 years. So this is 0 to 7 years old. It runs deep because of that. It's largely unconscious because of that. Our mental system wasn't online in the way that it is when we're adults or even when we're 10 years old. But your body remembers all of it. And that is the tightness that you feel in your body. That's the tension that you feel. It is somatic work, this SQ. It's physical, right? We had mental, emotional, and this is physical. When you feel unsafe physically, we close down our heart and we see the world as a victim. And that is what this SQ sphere represents. It's the closing or opening of our heart. And the more your heart is able to stay open, the more incredible life you are going to have, period, the end. And that includes your partner. That includes the love of your life. When our heart closes, we have to learn how to parent ourselves. Remember, this is coming from a 7-year-old version of you. So you've got to be gentle, you've got to be kind, you've got to be compassionate, you've got to talk to yourself like a young kid, because that's exactly what's happening when your SQ gets triggered. You're dealing with a 5-year-old. And so many people look outside of themselves when this gets triggered to fix this, because our parents were supposed to do it in the first place. And unfortunately for many of us, it didn't work out that way. And so we've got to learn how to parent ourselves. But instead, we still believe that somebody outside of us must be able to help. Because what's happening in us just feels too big. We don't believe we have the capacity, but your heart can open so much bigger than you think it can open, a lesson I'm still learning. But instead of opening our heart and handling it, parenting us, we outsource it to our partner. We ask them or expect them to step in and help. And they have absolutely no chance at all of being able to handle this exactly like it needs to be handled in your eyes. And so unknowingly, we are setting them up for failure 100 out of 100 times. And you just perpetuated the instability that you feel in your love life. But instead, you've got to open your heart as wide as it will go. You've got to learn to parent yourself and to be gentle. Because if you try to outsource that healing, you've already started another cycle of suffering. Coming out of the sphere of SQ, we get to our final sphere, and that is the sphere of the core wound. And the core is different than all of the other spheres we've talked about thus far, because it's something you're carrying for the collective. It is a wound that all humanity feels, and they all have slightly different flavors, but it's good to remember that we're all carrying baggage. We're all carrying something. And in the Gene Keys system, we believe that that baggage shows up in the form of your junk DNA. So 90% of our DNA right now is seen as junk DNA. And it's my belief that that DNA holds the karma of our collective past and all the history of everything leading up until now. And that gets us into the mystical teachings of the gene keys. And so if you found this video and you're not familiar with the gene keys system, this part might sound a little bit weird, but I encourage you to have an open mind. And if you can't open your mind to think about things in this way, maybe you just think about your life experiences as causing these things to show up in your life. And that's okay. That's kind of all I'm saying anyway. Your body is a reflection of the entire universe. Every ocean, every blade of grass, every ant, every star is reflected inside of your body. And at the time of your birth, you are imprinted with your gene keys, which is your genetic makeup that dictates your specific path of awakening. And when you are in the womb, you are imprinted with all of these spheres at various times. And the core wound is imprinted over that period of gestation. Interestingly, even though IQ, EQ, and SQ are developed in those 7-year cycles once you're born, the seeds for what's going to happen are laid down in the 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6 to 9 month gestation period. Again, because everything is hologenetic, one inside of the other, inside of the other. The other thing that's important to understand with the gene key system is what happens when we die, what happens to our soul. And in the gene keys, we talk about different energy bodies. 3 of them we've already talked about: physical, mental, emotional. Another, or the next energetic body, is what's called your causal body. And this is a way to think of this as your soul. And your causal body sticks around from lifetime to lifetime. So when you die, all of the good that you did in the world, all of the lessons that you learned, get sucked up into your causal body, so that when you come back the next time, you have integrated those lessons and you can keep marching this path of evolution. Also, when you die, all of the not great things that you did are burned from your causal body and they are left here. However, those are the things that are going into this collective karma, this core wound, which is why we all feel it, we all experience it. And so if this is true, which I believe it is, and if the rest of the Gene Keys teachings, which it goes much, much farther and deeper than that, if you haven't read the 22nd and 55th Gene Key, I really, really encourage you to do so. Well, that means that we have been here many lifetimes and we have been with different souls many lifetimes. And there are people that are karmically bound together. And that goes all the way back to how I started this, that there is someone on this planet who makes it so that you can live your purpose. And just like they do for you, you are a key for them to live their purpose. So in that way, our relationships serve us in fulfilling our dharma and furthering the development of our causal body, of our soul. And so it can be helpful to zoom out and remember how much the details really don't matter and how much the big picture, staying an open heart and staying in love, really do matter. Remember that there is impersonal suffering out there. That can be helpful when dealing with life and when thinking about your partner and what they're going through. I really encourage you to think about what's going on and with your patterning and start to choose differently so that your frequency can remain higher, so that your attractor field remains powerful and clear, so that you can call in a partner that is going to help you live your purpose, which ultimately is serving the whole.